The Deep Space Research Station horizon drifted silently through the endless void, its hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. Inside the station's main control room, Lieutenant James Turner stared at the unusual readings on his screen, his coffee growing cold beside him. "Captain, you need to see this," James called out, his eyes fixed on the strange energy signature. "There's something out there. Something big." Captain Ray walked over, her boots clicking against the metal floor. She leaned over James's shoulder, frowning at the display. "Natural phenomenon. No, Nam. It's artificial. And it's drawing power, barely enough to stay alive." James pointed to the flickering energy readings. "Whatever it is, it's dying." The captain straightened up, her decision made quickly. "Take a team out. But be careful, Turner. We're a research station, not a battleship." Within an hour, James found himself aboard a small exploration vessel, accompanied by 2 security officers and a medical technician. As they approached the mysterious object, their spotlights revealed a massive ship, unlike anything humans had ever encountered. Its dark hull seemed to absorb light, covered in strange patterns that looked almost like living tissue. "This is Lieutenant Turner, beginning approach," James spoke into his comm. "The vessel appears damaged. No signs of recent activity." He paused, studying the hull. "Wait, there's an opening. Looks like a docking port. It's compatible with our systems." The security officers exchanged nervous glances as their ship locked onto the alien vessel with a dull clang. James checked his environment suit one last time before leading the team through the airlock. Inside, their lights revealed corridors that seemed to pulse with faint bioluminescence. The air was breathable but cold, and their footsteps echoed strangely in the empty halls. "These readings are odd," the medical technician, Dr. Wells, muttered. "The ship's maintaining minimal life support, but it's focused on one specific area." They followed the energy signatures deeper into the ship. James felt his heart racing as they approached a large chamber. The security officers raised their weapons as the doors slid open with a hiss. The chamber was filled with hibernation pods, most of them dark and empty. But one, in the center, still glowed with a faint blue light. James approached it slowly, wiping away the frost from its surface. He jumped back with a gasp. Inside was a creature that haunted the nightmares of every space traveler. Black scales covered its massive body. Razor-sharp spines ran down its back, and even in sleep, its claws looked deadly enough to tear through metal. That's a shadow hunter," one of the security officers whispered, his voice shaking. "We need to leave. Now." James knew the stories. Everyone did. 3 colonies had been destroyed by these creatures. They were supposed to be mindless killing machines, the perfect predators. But something wasn't right. "Look at these readings," James said, studying the pod's control panel. "It's injured. The pod is trying to heal it, but the systems are failing." He pointed to various indicators. "These aren't the life signs of a mindless beast. They're too complex." "Lieutenant, we have orders about shadow hunters," the senior security officer reminded him. "Shoot on sight. No exceptions." James stood his ground. "This is a research station. We're scientists, not executioners." He keyed his comm. "Captain, we found a shadow hunter in suspended animation. It's injured, and its life support is failing, requesting permission to bring it aboard for study." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. "Turner, have you lost your mind?" The captain's voice crackled through the comm. "That thing is a killer. The military will be here in 2 days to deal with it." James looked at the creature in the pod. Despite its fearsome appearance, he could see signs of advanced technology integrated with its pod, suggesting intelligence far beyond what the stories claimed. "Captain, if we leave it here, it dies. That's not who we are. We're explorers, discoverers. This could be the greatest opportunity to understand these creatures. Please." Another long pause followed. "This is on your head, Turner," the captain finally replied. "Bring it in. but it stays in full containment. If anything goes wrong, anything at all, we space it. Understood. James nodded, relief flooding through him. Understood, Captain. Thank you. As they began preparations to move the pod, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to either make the discovery of a lifetime or a mistake that would haunt him forever. Either way, there would be no turning back. Moving the hibernation pod to the Horizon's secure containment lab took 6 nervous hours. James watched as the medical team connected their life support systems to the ancient pod, his breath fogging the reinforced observation window. Power levels stabilizing, Dr. Wells announced, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The pod systems are accepting our input. But James, these readings are unlike anything I've seen. This creature's brain activity is off the charts. James pressed closer to the window. The shadow hunter remained motionless in its pod, but now, under the bright lights of the lab, he could see details he'd missed before. Strange markings covered its scales, too regular to be natural. What looked like cybernetic implants were integrated seamlessly with its body. Those aren't battle scars, he muttered. They're writing. This creature is modified. Enhanced. A sharp alarm cut through his thoughts. Red lights flashed across the lab as the pod's systems suddenly spiked. The pod's failing, Dr. Wells shouted. Its core systems are shutting down. We need to do something now. The security team raised their weapons as the pod's cover began to crack. Steam hissed from the seals, and the whole unit shuddered. Everyone out. The security chief ordered. We'll seal the lab and... No, James interrupted. Look at the medical readings. It's not attacking. It's dying. He rushed to the inner door. I'm going in. Lieutenant Turner, stand down. The chief's voice crackled over the intercom. That's an order. But James had already sealed himself inside. He approached the pod slowly, his heart pounding. The shadow hunter's massive chest rose and fell with labored breaths, its spines flexing weakly. Through the pod's cracked cover, one massive eye opened. James froze. The eye was deep amber, with a surprisingly complex iris that focused on him with unmistakable intelligence. The creature made a sound, not the roar from horror stories, but a complex series of clicks and whistles. It raised one clawed hand, not in threat, but in what seemed like desperation. James did something that would either make history or end his life. He reached out and took the creature's hand. The moment they touched, images flooded his mind. Pain, fear, memories of being altered, enhanced, forced to fight. The creature was trying to communicate. Dr. Wells, James called out, his voice shaking. I need a full medical team in here now. And bring the universal translator. Have you lost your mind? She responded. That thing will kill you. It's not what we thought. It's trying to talk to us. Please, trust me. Minutes stretched like hours as James stood there, maintaining contact with the shadow hunter. Finally, the inner door hissed open. Dr. Wells entered in a protective suit, followed by 2 nervous medics. The next few hours were a blur of activity. They worked to stabilize the creature's condition, treating injuries that seemed to be the result of some kind of brutal experimentation. The universal translator struggled with the creature's language, but slowly began to form basic patterns. As the emergency stabilized, James sat exhausted beside the creature's new medical bed. The shadow hunter was now breathing steadily, its massive form secured by fields that were meant to protect it rather than cage it. The military's going to be here tomorrow, Captain Ray said from the doorway. They're bringing a specialist containment unit. Orders are to terminate and preserve for study. James stood up, his face set with determination. Captain, this creature isn't just some mindless killer. It's intelligent, possibly more advanced than us. Those marks on its body. They're a written language. It was engineered, turned into a weapon against his will. The shadow hunter stirred, its eye focusing on James again. The translator crackled with its first clear translation. Help, not weapon. Person. Captain Ray stared at the creature, then at James. You have until the military arrives to prove it's not a threat. After that, she left the sentence unfinished. James turned back to the Shadow Hunter, determination in his eyes. He had less than 24 hours to prevent what could be the greatest diplomatic disaster in human history. Or perhaps, if he succeeded, its greatest triumph. The hours ticked by like years as James worked to understand the creature. He had moved a cot into the medical bay, catching sleep in short bursts, while monitoring the Shadow Hunter's recovery. The universal translator was slowly improving, but it wasn't fast enough. I need a name for you, James said, looking up from his datapad. Something better than the creature or the Shadow Hunter. The massive being tilted its head, spines shifting in what James had begun to recognize as curiosity. Its voice came through the translator in broken fragments. Names, important to humans. Yes, they help us connect, understand each other better. James watched as the creature's bioluminescent markings pulsed softly. Your patterns remind me of storm clouds. Would you mind if I called you Storm? The creature's amber eyes seemed to brighten. Storm, acceptable. There was a pause. Then, James, different from others. Not afraid. Oh, I'm terrified, James admitted with a small laugh. But being scared doesn't mean you run away. Sometimes it means you stay and try to understand. Their conversation was interrupted as Dr. Wells entered the room, carrying new medical supplies. She still wore a protective suit, though James had long since stopped wearing his. She flinched when Storm turned to look at her. The military transport will be here in 6 hours, she said, keeping her distance. James, you need to show them something concrete. Feelings and broken translations won't be enough. Storm's markings flashed in a pattern James hadn't seen before. The translator sparked with new words. Show them. Our past. The makers. James leaned forward eagerly. Can you tell us more about who made you? Who turned your people into weapons? Storm rose to its full height, nearly touching the ceiling. Instead of speaking, it pressed one clawed hand against the medical bay's main screen. The screen flickered, then filled with images that made James and Dr. Wells gasp. They saw vast cities of crystal and light, inhabited by beings that looked like earlier versions of Storm's species. Then came ships from the sky, bringing destruction and slavery. The images showed laboratories where Storm's people were transformed, their bodies and minds enhanced against their will. We were peaceful, Storm explained, the translator working better now. The makers came, changed us, made us fight, kill, but some escaped, went to sleep, waited for different future. Dr. Wells had moved closer, her fear forgotten in scientific fascination. The hibernation pods. You were waiting to be found by someone who would understand. Yes. Storm turned to James. Found right one. James was about to respond when the station's alarms blared. Captain Ray's voice came over the intercom. Turner, the military transport arrived early. They're demanding immediate access to the specimen. Storm's spines bristled, but not in aggression. James recognized fear in the movement. They will terminate, study, make weapons again. Not if I can help it. James straightened up, an idea forming. Storm, would you be willing to show them what you just showed us? And more importantly, would you trust me to stay here alone while you do it? The Shadow Hunter's eyes studied James for a long moment. Then, slowly, it extended its hand. Trust goes both ways. When the military team burst into the medical bay 10 minutes later, they found James sitting calmly beside the galaxy's most feared predator, both of them watching the screen as it displayed the true history of the Shadow Hunter species. Gentlemen, James said without turning around, I believe we need to update our records. We're not dealing with a weapon or a specimen. We're dealing with a refugee. And possibly, he looked up at Storm, seeing determination matched in those alien eyes, the key to preventing a war none of us knew was coming. The military commander stepped forward, weapon lowered but ready. You have 5 minutes to explain why I shouldn't order this creature's immediate termination. James smiled. Actually, sir, Storm here has a much better idea. How would you like to hear about the real threat to human space? The one that's been sleeping for 1,000 years, just like Storm was. Storm's markings pulsed with a new pattern. The translator spoke clear words. Tell them everything. Time to wake up, Galaxy. The military commander, Colonel West, stood with his arms crossed, watching the last of Storm's historical records play out on the screen. His face remained hard, but his eyes had softened slightly. An interesting story, he said finally, but it doesn't change the fact that your kind destroyed 3 of our colonies. He turned to Storm. How do you explain that? Storm's markings pulsed with a dark blue pattern that James had learned meant sadness. Others, still controlled. Still weapons. Need help. Freedom. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared through the station. Captain Ray's voice crackled over the intercom. Multiple ships just dropped out of hyperspace. They're not responding to hails, and their designs match the ones from Storm's records. The colonel's hand went to his weapon, but Storm was already moving. Instead of attacking, it rushed to the medical bay's control panel, claws flying over the controls with surprising delicacy. The Makers come. Storm's translator boomed. They track awakening pods. Always watching. Always hunting. James watched as new images appeared on the screen. Tactical displays showing 5 massive ships approaching the station. Those ships, he said, they're not here to talk, are they? No, Storm replied. Here to reclaim. Collect weapons. Us. Its amber eyes fixed on Colonel West. Choice now. Trust me. Fight together. Or lose everything. The station shuddered as the first impacts hit their shields. Colonel West looked at his tactical pad, then at Storm, his face tight with conflict. Sir, James stepped forward. Storm could have killed everyone on this station 100 times over. Instead, it's trying to help us. Maybe it's time we helped back. Another blast rocked the station. The colonel made his decision. What do you need? Storm's markings flashed bright with determination. Access to weapons systems. Can sense Maker ships. No weaknesses. Granted, the colonel said, then turned to his team. Get this creature whatever it needs. Now. The next hour was chaos. Storm worked with the station's defense teams, guiding their shots to previously unknown weak points in the Maker ship's shields. James stayed by Storm's side, helping translate more complex strategic concepts that the universal translator struggled with. James, Storm suddenly said, its voice urgent through the translator. Makers not just want me. Want all sleeping ones. Coordinates in pod. Must protect. Understanding dawned on James's face. The pod you were in, it had navigation data for other survivors. Yes. Others sleep. Wake for rescue. Storm's claws gripped the console tightly. If Makers get coordinates. Another blast hit the station, stronger this time. Captain Ray's voice came through. Shields at 30%. We can't take much more of this. James looked at the tactical display, then at Storm. An idea formed. Storm, what if we didn't just defend? Your pod's engines still work, right? And you know how the Maker ships think. Storm's markings pulsed with what James now recognized as approval. Yes. Leave them away. Protect others. No, James corrected, stepping closer to his friend. We lead them away. I'm coming with you. The colonel started to object, but James cut him off. I'm the only one who can work with Storm effectively, and someone needs to wipe the navigation data before we go. Storm turned its massive head to look at James, spines flexing with emotion. Dangerous. Might not return. That's what friends are for, James replied with a grim smile. Besides, somebody needs to help you find the others once we lose these ships. Colonel West looked between them, then nodded sharply. You have 1 hour. Make it look like you're escaping under fire from us. We'll play along, Then hold off the maker ships as long as we can. As they rushed to prepare the pod, Storm touched James's shoulder gently with one claw. "Humans strange," it said through the translator. "Face death to save others. Save enemies." "Not enemies," James corrected, checking the pod's systems. "Just friends we haven't made yet." Storm's markings pulsed with a new color, one James had never seen before. The translator was silent, but somehow James understood perfectly. Whatever happened next, a line had been crossed. Human and Shadow Hunter, working together not just to survive, but to protect others. The hunt was about to begin. But this time, the hunters would become the hunted. The plan worked better than anyone expected. As James and Storm's pod burst from the station's docking bay, the maker ships took the bait immediately. Emergency broadcasts from the horizon sold the deception perfectly, crying out about the escape of a dangerous specimen. Inside the pod, James worked the controls while Storm monitored the pursuit. 4 ships following. Storm reported, its markings pulsing rapidly. "One stays at station." "Good," James replied, pushing the engines harder. "They believe we're running scared. But they don't know we modified this pod's engines with your knowledge of their technology." The pod shot through space, dancing between asteroid fields and solar winds. Storm's natural understanding of space combat made their small craft move in ways that should have been impossible. Behind them, the massive maker ships struggled to keep up. "James," Storm's translator crackled. "Message coming." From human space. The communication system lit up with multiple signals. James's eyes widened as he read them. It's the Science Council and the Colonial Defense Force. They've seen the data we transmitted from the station about your people. He opened the first message, and a familiar face appeared on the screen. Dr. Wells. "James, you crazy fool," she said, but she was smiling. "Your evidence about Storm's species is spreading across human space like wildfire. The other research stations are analyzing it now. We found references to the makers in ancient ruins. They're called the Dominion." Storm's markings flashed with recognition. Yes, Dominion, Empire of Enslavers. "The Colonial Defense Force is mobilizing," Dr. Wells continued. "They've detected more hibernation pods in other sectors. Teams are moving to protect them. But James, there's something else. Something big." Another face appeared on the screen. Colonel West from the station. "Turner, we've been monitoring the maker ship's communications. They're not just here for Storm. They're scouting for a full invasion. They want to use Earth's population the same way they used the Shadow Hunters." James felt Storm move closer to the screen, its massive form radiating anger. "Will not allow," Storm declared. "Humans freed me. Now we free others." The pod sensors blared a warning. 2 maker ships were closing in, their weapons charging. James prepared to execute another evasive maneuver, but Storm placed a clawed hand on his arm. "Wait," Storm said. "Look." From the darkness of space, new ships appeared, smaller than the maker vessels, but more numerous. Human ships, dozens of them, dropping out of hyperspace around them. A new voice came over the comm. "Lieutenant Turner, this is Admiral Pierce of the Colonial Defense Force. We've read your reports. We've seen the evidence. Request permission to assist in your evasive action." James looked at Storm, who nodded. "Permission granted, Admiral. But we need to take at least one of these maker ships intact. Storm says there's crucial information aboard about other captured species." "Understood," the Admiral replied. "We have boarding teams ready. Just get us an opening." Storm's markings pulsed with a pattern James had never seen. Excitement mixed with hope. "James," it said, "remember how Pod's engines modified?" James grinned as he understood. "They can also overload. Create a disruption field." "Yes, disable maker ships. No harm crew. Just systems." The next few minutes were intense. The pod dove between the maker ships, human vessels providing covering fire. At just the right moment, Storm triggered the engine overload. A wave of energy pulsed out, and the massive Maker ships went dark. As boarding teams moved in, more messages flooded their comm system. Other research stations had found and awakened more shadow hunters. Each one confirmed Storm's story. Each one wanted to help. "Look at this," James said softly, showing Storm the incoming data. "Your people, my people, working together." The Makers never saw this coming. Storm's translator hummed with what sounded almost like laughter. "Makers think all species fight. Never understand friendship." Its markings pulsed warmly. "Never understand humans." The pod turned back toward human space, now escorted by a fleet of human and newly awakened shadow hunter vessels. The real war was just beginning, but something extraordinary had already been won. Trust had defeated fear, and an unlikely friendship had changed the galaxy forever. The captured Maker ship's database revealed humanity's worst fears. The Dominion wasn't sending scouts. They were sending an advance force. A massive invasion fleet was already on its way to human space. In the war room of Earth's primary defense station, James stood beside Storm, both looking at the holographic display of the coming threat. Over 50 Dominion warships, each carrying hundreds of enslaved species. "They think we'll be easy to conquer," Admiral Pierce said, pointing to the invasion routes. "They've done this for thousands of years. Find a species, break them, turn them into weapons." Storm's markings pulsed with dark colors. "Not this time," the translator conveyed. "Humans different. Shadow hunters free. Together, we fight." The room was filled with both human military leaders and newly awakened shadow hunters. What once would have caused panic now felt natural. In the 3 weeks since the first contact, more pods had been found and more shadow hunters had joined their cause. "The Dominion's main advantage has always been fear," James explained, pointing to specific ships in the hologram. "They expect species to turn on each other. But we've proven that doesn't have to happen." A junior officer burst into the room. "Sir, the Dominion fleet just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Arcturus system. They're broadcasting a message to all human colonies." The hologram shifted, showing a being that looked almost crystalline, its voice cold and artificial. "Primitive species of Earth, you harbor our property. The weapons you call shadow hunters. Return them, submit to testing for combat compatibility, and your deaths will be quick. Resist, and we will ensure your suffering lasts generations." Storm stepped forward, its massive form casting shadows in the hologram's light. "Need to show them. Show all enslaved species. Freedom possible." James nodded, an idea forming. "Admiral, those ships we captured, their broadcast systems are still intact, right?" "Yes, but..." The Admiral's eyes widened as he understood. "You want to show them Storm. Show them what we've accomplished." "Not just Storm," James said. "Show them all of it. The shadow hunters working with us. The combined fleets. Show them that their greatest weapon, fear, doesn't work anymore." The next hour was a blur of activity. As the Dominion fleet approached, every human and shadow hunter ship in range took position. They broadcast images across all frequencies. Humans and shadow hunters working together, fighting together, living together. The Dominion's response was swift and brutal. Their ships opened fire, but they found themselves facing something they'd never encountered before. Perfectly coordinated teams of humans and shadow hunters. Human ships provided cover, while shadow hunter vessels struck at weak points they remembered from their own enslavement. The battle was fierce, but something unexpected began to happen. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're getting signals from inside the Dominion ships. The enslaved species, they're rebelling." Storm's markings pulsed with bright victory colors. "They see, understand, freedom possible, unity possible." On the main screen, they watched as Dominion ships began to turn on each other. Enslaved crews, inspired by the sight of freed shadow hunters, broke their conditioning and fought back. James put his hand on Storm's shoulder, feeling the smooth scales under his palm. "Your people were the first, friend. You showed them all it was possible. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Dominion had built their empire on fear and division. They had no defense against unity and trust. As the last Dominion ship fell dark, Admiral Pierce turned to the assembled leaders. This isn't over. There will be more ships, more battles. The Dominion won't give up their power easily. No, Storm agreed, its translator carrying a tone of determination. Not over. But now all enslaved species know truth. No freedom possible. It turned its amber eyes to James. No friendship possible. James looked around the room, at humans and Shadowhunters standing together, planning together, and smiled. The galaxy was changing, one friendship at a time. The Dominion's greatest mistake hadn't been waking Storm. It had been underestimating humanity's capacity to see past fear to the person within. 1 year after the Great Battle, James stood at the observation deck of the new human Shadowhunter Joint Academy, watching ships land and take off. Below him, the colony of New Dawn sprawled across the landscape, its buildings designed to accommodate both species comfortably. Storm entered the room, its movements now familiar and welcome to everyone in the facility. Time for ceremony, the translator spoke, though James hardly needed it anymore. He'd grown so used to Storm's markings and gestures that he could understand most meanings without help. Hard to believe it's been a year, James said, turning from the window. Remember when everyone thought this was impossible? Storm's markings pulsed with amusement. Humans taught us important lesson. Nothing impossible with trust. They walked together through the Academy's halls. Human and Shadowhunter students moved past them, some in deep discussion, others hurrying to classes. What had once caused terror now brought hope. The Academy had become a symbol of what was possible when fear was replaced with understanding. In the main auditorium, Admiral Pierce stood at the podium, addressing the gathered crowd of both species. 1 year ago, we faced extinction. The Dominion threatened not just our lives, but our very way of life. They believed that different species could never truly work together. He gestured to James and Storm as they took their places on stage. But they didn't count on two things: humanity's capacity for friendship and the Shadowhunters' desire for freedom. Together, we proved that the galaxy's greatest strength isn't in weapons or fear, it's in unity. The Admiral stepped aside, letting James take the podium. Storm stood beside him, a position that now felt as natural as breathing. Today, we're not just celebrating victory, James began. We're celebrating the start of something new. The Joint Protection Force is now fully operational. Human and Shadowhunter ships patrol together, protecting both our peoples and helping free others still under Dominion control. Storm's markings pulsed with pride as James continued. But more importantly, we're celebrating understanding. Every day, more Dominion slaves choose freedom. Every day, more species learn that cooperation is stronger than conquest. The crowd erupted in applause as James presented the latest figures. 23 species freed from Dominion control, 15 joint colonies established, and hundreds of successful human Shadowhunter partnerships. After the ceremony, James and Storm walked through the Academy's memorial garden. Holographic displays showed key moments from the past year: the first battle, the liberation of Dominion slave worlds, the founding of New Dawn Colony. Remember when you first woke up? James asked, stopping at the display of their first meeting. I was terrified. Storm's markings rippled with gentle humor. Was also terrified. Weak, hurt, surrounded by unknown species. Its amber eyes met James, but you showed kindness. Changed everything. A group of students approached them, 3 humans and 2 young Shadowhunters, all wearing the Academy uniforms. They were part of the first class of the new diplomatic corps, trained to help other species transition to freedom. The next mission briefing is ready, one of the human students said. We've detected more stasis pods in the Centauri sector. Storm's markings brightened. More brothers and sisters to free. More friends to make. James looked at the eager faces before him, human and Shadowhunter alike, working together without fear or prejudice. This was their legacy, not just victory over the Dominion, but proof that the galaxy's future didn't have to be built on fear. "Well," he said, smiling at Storm, "should we show them how it's done?" Storm's markings pulsed with the pattern that James had long ago learned meant friendship. Together, the translator spoke, though James didn't need it anymore. He knew what his friend meant. As they headed to the briefing room, followed by their students, James thought about how far they'd come. One act of trust had changed the galaxy. One friendship had sparked a revolution. And this was just the beginning. The Dominion had created the Shadowhunters to be the galaxy's most lethal predators. Instead, they had become proof that no species was beyond redemption, no difference too great to bridge, and no force in the universe stronger than trust freely given and returned.